So, hi everyone. My name is Amber Glock, and I'm one of the cinematics animators at Epic Games. Do we have the thing up? Ah! No, we don't. Okay, there we go. Now we have the presentation up. We'll get there again. Just now you're prepared for the jump scare that's coming. All right, so yeah, my name is Amber Glock. I'm one of the cinematics animators at Epic Games. The lessons learned from a Fortnite animator is slightly misleading because we actually get to work on Lego Fortnite, Fortnite Festival, as well as also Rocket Racing. But right now, today, we're going to take a look at just one of our Fortnite trailers, the Fortnite crew trailer we released back, I believe, in April for the Ares character. I have a demo for you guys with just a small demo I made with one of our dragon rigs that you may have seen earlier in Matt Ringo's presentation. And then finally, I want to talk about why we switched from animating in a more traditional animation software like Maya to animating in Unreal, how we set up our cinematic animations, and then also go through a few of the tools that I like using when I'm animating an engine. So without further ado, let's take a look at that Ares trailer. It's going to get loud here in a sec, so be warned. Come on. So I would absolutely love to tell you that that entire thing was animated in Unreal. I do have one caveat where it was not. If we can play this, maybe. Yeah. So this character right here with the pink hair, I will not mention the animator on our team who did bring her into Maya at the last minute, but we started her in Unreal. He couldn't figure out how to do one specific thing. And then was like, you know what, I'm just going to bring her into Maya real quick. And the fact is that he was able to do that in 2 hours. That's one of the reasons I want to bring this up is, yes, you're animating in Unreal, but you're not necessarily tied to it if you don't want to be. We work with a bunch of outsourcers who are still very much we're bringing them slowly into the dark side and animating on Unreal. But for now, some of them are still very much avid Maya users, and the brilliant thing is we can use both, and we have trailers that we've done where some of the shots are completely in Unreal, other shots are a mix of Maya and Unreal, and then other shots are completely in Maya. So, why did we switch to animating our cinematics in Unreal? Well, one of the biggest things is all of our cinematics are ultimately rendered out of Unreal, so not just because Epic told us to. So all of our cinematics are ultimately rendered out of Unreal, and our lighting artists, our layout artists are already working entirely in Unreal. And that kind of creates a bit of a problem, because the camera is entirely in Unreal, and on cinematics at least, we're animating to camera. So how do we get that camera out of Unreal and into Maya? Well, we created this awesome process. We had our pipeline team develop really, really awesome tools for it. And even still, best case scenario for this round tripping process, it took us, Mason Taylor is one of our fellow animators on the cinematics team, and myself would be typically the only two people doing this round tripping process, and on our longer trailers especially, would take us 2 to 3 days just to get the whole trailer done. And that's kind of a huge bottleneck, especially when our team is working so fast because we have so many trailers that we're trying to get through. So that, one sec, sorry. And then on top of that, our team is constantly, trying to push the bounds of what we've done before and do new cool things in the engine and new cool things with our cinematics. And working at Epic, the engine's constantly evolving and constantly updating as we get new updates in from awesome, developers who are constantly trying to improve it, which kind of creates an issue with our tools that I mentioned earlier. They're always breaking. And this is not a dig at our pipeline team. This is just the nature of the beast. They do wonderful work. It's just unfortunate. Thank you. Oh, see, I'm already going to trip over this thing. So yeah, ultimately it leads to a lot of time that we have to spend troubleshooting, and like as an animator, I'm not very technical, so I don't like doing the troubleshooting. And so working in engine actually just means that I get to spend more time in engine animating than like, troubleshooting why my animation in Maya and my animation in Unreal doesn't look the same. The other great thing about working in Unreal is that we actually get to work more closely with the other departments, and we get more updates more often. So if I'm working in Maya, a lot of times what happens is I'm not in Unreal every day, and we've had, on more than one occasion, little hiccups where the layout artists are actually still working on the camera after we've built our Maya files. And so I'll be animating to a camera for 2 days and then bring it back into Engine and go, oh, that's not how that's supposed to look. So that can be a huge problem. But like working in Engine actually creates an awesome solution to that, because it means we get to have animators working with our layout artists in previs. With our Lego Fortnite launch trailer that we did back in November, December, we actually had animators do entire sequences in previs and then continue on to animate those into production. And this gave us a huge like head start on animation into production that allowed us to actually get the trailer done faster. And then on top of that, obviously being an engine means we get to see things with the current lighting, the current visual effects, so that like, I don't know about you guys, but I've had times where lighting has affected the facial performance so much and the readability of it that I've had to completely change the facial performance to get it to read under different lighting. So being able to see with current lighting is a huge bonus, and getting to see and work with the effects artists is amazing. Juan Collado is one of our other developers on the cinematics team, and he does a lot of the derezzing effects. And so he's made the tool in such a way where those little cubes actually fly based on how the character is animating when they're falling or doing whatever. So that was really fun. I got to work on this shot with Juan to kind of get the best performance I possibly could out of it. So there's been a lot of talks on animating in engine and games, but there hasn't been a lot on the more cinematic side, so I just want to cover a few things first, and then I promise we'll get into that demo. So first things first, I want to talk about what a linked animation sequence is, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, because I'll be using this talking about it for a little bit for a couple more slides. So a linked animation sequence is very similar to any other animation sequence you find in Unreal. However, this one is special in that instead of being an animation sequence that you've brought in, that's created when you bring in an animation from outside of Unreal, this one is actually tied to a specific control rig animation that's made in Unreal. And so every time I work with that control rig animation, update it, save it, that animation sequence also gets updated. So that's actually really cool for game animation, because we need those animation sequences for working with animation blueprints. And so they're pretty reliant on it, and it's one of the coolest things, because I actually got to help Lego Fortnite for a while before the game came out, working on some of their characters. And getting to see my animation and then bringing it into the engine, and or getting to see my animation and then bringing it into the game, and just seeing all of those updates in just now is kind of miraculous and magic. And then on top of that, for Lego Fortnite at least, Jacob Buck has made this awesome tool called the Animation Browser that kind of sets up everything for animating an engine for the game team. It creates that single empty level that you need with the single character you need, adds the control rig into the sequence, creates the link animation sequence. And we've tried finding uses for that in the cinematics team. Unfortunately, because of how we work, it kind of just didn't matter. So, because how a cinematic ultimately works is we typically have a very big level. We're working typically with a piece of the Fortnite map. And then we also have multiple level sequences nested under a master level sequence to kind of basically create, this is how our cinematic looks and works. And so we end up navigating to our shots through that master sequence rather than through an animation browser or a special tool like that. And then we've gone back and forth on working with linked animations before. Some people definitely love them, other people don't. So I definitely find them more optional. So let's take a look just real quick at pros and cons for that. So the pros on a linked animation sequence using it in cinematics is that it actually is a little bit closer to that traditional external animation software workflow, like in Maya. So if I want to show the directors an update in Maya, I have to bring that animation into Engine, and then they see it when it's rendered. And that's kind of how it will work with the linked animation sequence, because I have to save that sequence and submit it for them to see those updates. When I don't have it, and I just save my control rig animation in the sequence, they can see updates when I'm maybe not ready to show them. And then linked animation sequences, at least in the beginning, tended to be more stable with cinematics. We definitely ran into issues with control rigs not rendering properly, and then effects definitely likes working with our animation sequences over control rigs. But on the flip side, I find the workflow that we've had to kind of come up with linked animation sequences to be a little more clunky. And so that's kind of why I was like, if we're already animating in Unreal, we should be celebrating that we're animating in Unreal. And we should be animating in those sequences directly so that we can actually just like not have to worry about all of the BS that comes with, getting things into where I need it to be. So yeah, linked animation sequences kind of reintroduces that round tripping process. I have to save that linked animation sequence. I have to save the control rig sequence, submit both of those, and then and then the directors will see the update. And I've had issues in the past where I actually, for one of our rocket racing trailers, I took over a sequence, or took over a shot from one of our outsourced animators. And the linked animation sequence had the latest animation and had all of and so like the notes I was getting was on that. Then I went down to the control rig that sequence was linked to, and they hadn't submitted the latest version. So I didn't have the latest animation that the notes were for. Thankfully, Unreal makes that really easy. I actually was just able to bake down the linked animation sequence to a control rig and work on it from there. But it did kind of it just creates another area where basically errors can happen. And then on top of that, if we see down here, I've got this just little tiny image, and it would help if I'm pointing this the right way. Down here you can see there's actually these two red sequences. One is kind of more grayed out and one's a little bit brighter red. So these are both animation sequences in Sequencer, animation subscenes in Sequencer. And the one that's kind of in bright red, this is kind of what we would do with a linked animation sequence, is we'd have, this one is the main animation sequence. It has the linked animation sequence. It's the one that's getting rendered. So it's active all the time, unless you need to work on your animation, in which case you have to mute this one, unmute this one down here, and this is the control rig sequence. And the reason we do this is because any subscene in Sequencer inherits things that are above it. So this is being our shot level sequence is going to have the camera and everything else that we need to be able to animate. So basically the linked animation sequence needs to be in the same place as the control rig sequence so that both can have the camera. And so going back to that multiple level sequences that are kind of nested together, basically this is kind of how our standard cinematic is set up. We start with our master sequence. It's our highest level, and it's kind of the ground truth of our entire cinematic. Ultimately, the final edit may be slightly different, just because we do like to sometimes keep the shots a little fat for rendering purposes, for getting proper motion blur and other things, because we've had sometimes where like the motion blur pops when the animation just starts right on frame one. But everything otherwise, like this has got everything almost exactly as you will see it in the final render. Underneath that, we're going to have our sequence level sequence, and that's kind of confusing just because in this case we're using that first iteration of sequence in like the film term, so a group of shots that are a complete narrative unit. So this is going to have all of the shots that are necessary for that sequence, as well as this is like you can see. Oh, wrong button. As you can see, like this is going to have like the data later, so like anything else that needs to be loaded, so any like main lighting rigs or anything that needs to be loaded is going to exist in this sequence. So something that's going to exist across all of those shots. And then last but certainly not least, this is our shot. We're gonna have our shot level sequence. This is gonna have everything it needs for just that specific shot. So just that specific shot. So we're going to start talking all of the subscenes for the individual disciplines working in that shot, as well as the camera and the like everything that layout has worked on. And the discipline subscenes are super important because that's how we have effects, environment, lighting, animation, all working on one shot at the same time without stepping on each other's toes. Everyone gets to check out their own subscene, they work on that, and then submit it. So no one's fighting for this shot sequence asset to get their work done. All right, so without further ado, now let's go take a look at that dragon demo I promised you we'd look at. Maybe? Hey. All right, so I just kind of made this small little like 2-shot sequence. It's kind of like, this is kind of what it would look like if I just got something from layout. So just to run through it real quick. So you can see we got a dragon, he's flying around, he dives down, he picks up this guy. Pretty simple stuff. So this first shot, as you can see, this is set up pretty much the same. This first shot's, kind of our master sequence / like sequence level because it's only 2 shots. We've got the shot level here, here's the animation subscene, and you can see this is kind of how it would look like if I was basically just getting the shot from our layout artists. A lot of times we're working with, especially in Fortnite, we're working with mocap. In Lego Fortnite, a lot of times our layout artists are actually blending in-game animation to create what's going to kind of be that previs of what the shot's looking like. And then, we've got a few other things in here. But you'll notice one thing is missing. There's no control rig. So the first thing I typically do when I get a shot is I'm actually going and I'm baking everything onto the control rig. So that brings up this pop-up that came up on the other one. Typically, the defaults seem to work just fine. So I'm gonna create that. And now you can see we have a control rig where everything's on ones and the animation sequences are still there, but it's been muted. And it looks like we baked our dragon's mouth did not actually work very well. But that's okay, because I can just come in here and delete all those keys. All right, so first things first, next thing I'm typically doing is obviously you'll see literally there's keys on absolutely every control and they're all on ones, and that's never fun to animate with, especially from a starting standpoint. So typically, first thing I do is I'll come in here, I'll come into our curve editor, I'll select all of the curves, and over here under filter, you'll see we have an option to bake them, and let's do every 3 keys for this guy. Sweet. So now I have less keys, but they all automatically turn to linear, so I'll just select them all again and hit 1. There they go. And now they're in auto tangent, and so, wait, that is not playing correctly. Oh, great, that's fun. Okay. I don't know why that wasn't playing correctly right there. But yeah. So now we've got our dragon rig, and he's got less information, but he's still doing more or less the same information. So from here, let's just take a look outside of our camera. We'll go, and let's look at some areas that probably need to be cleaned up. So one thing I'm noticing with this guy is the shoulders are creating kind of a lot of odd transformations. So let's actually go in here. If I could spell. So let's take these guys, and I'm gonna once again, I think for this, just go ahead and delete the motion because I don't know what's exactly breaking there, and they shouldn't really be, I don't think they'll need to move too much anyway. So yeah, already that's looking a little better. And so from here, I mean, I would, could take this guy and I'd start actually looking at how how do I want it moving? How do I think it should, how do I think it should look? And I can play around with, like, maybe his head doesn't need to lead as much. And we will, you know, it's Y actually. So maybe I don't want his head to come up quite so high, so we can use our tween tool and maybe bring it down a little bit. Maybe lead that rotation a little bit for sooner, so he's like looking down. I mean, I think you kind of get the idea. From here, I would probably spend a lot of time actually playing and messing with it, and I don't want to spend too much time doing that because I do want to get through some other stuff. So I actually have created another version of this sequence for you guys, where I've spent probably about a couple hours just cleaning it up a little bit so you can get an idea of what it would look like. So there we go. So yeah, as here we can see I've added some animation back in on his claws, cleaned it up a little bit. There's still a few hitches in the animation, so I still would not consider this done by any stretch of the imagination. And I will say, actually, just because I just noticed the popping a little bit, that's actually because this dragon's got some dynamics going on it. So if you're scrubbing and you see anything pop, you'll notice it's not actually there when it plays. It's just because that's kind of happens a little bit when you scrub a little bit and there are active dynamics on it. But yeah, so let's take a look at our next shot, which is the one with the guy running, and then the dragon comes in and picks him up. So obviously, I've done a little bit of work on the dragon already and cleaned him up, but our guy is kind of just doing, well, he's kind of just doing. I haven't worked on him at all. So let's do a little bit of the same thing just to, I guess, reiterate a little bit. So obviously, first thing I want to do is select this guy and select all those keys, filter, we'll do 3 again. And then from here, there's something else going on that I really don't actually like too much, which is that there's actually a lot of animation happening on this is kind of like on the mannequin level, like above, it's actually even above the root control. And I don't like sequence, our layout artists will often, that's how they'll animate things. And I don't really like having animation there because then I'm counter animating against things. So let's go ahead and actually do some space switching to get him off of that. So first, let's select this guy. We'll select his feet. And yeah, let's go, and that's constraints. So new with 5.4 is some, you can actually, for spaces, you can actually add custom spaces in. For this guy, I mean, all I really want is preserve his world space, for these controls in world space. So I'm just going to switch them to world. Oh, actually, and I just fucked up. Excuse me 1 sec. Make sure when you're space switching that you have this at the beginning of the shot, because it actually just switches the spaces from wherever your playhead is. So yeah, let's do that again. So we'll switch it to world. It's going to think for a hot second. And cool. So now I should be able to delete all of this, and you'll see his root control disappeared out from underneath of him because it went back to wherever that starting position for it was. But he is now completely running exactly where he was. So that's awesome. So next, let's work on this dragon grabbing him a bit. Because we'll notice if we come in, the dragon comes in, he kind of grabs him, but then not really. So what I'm actually going to do is, because I've done this, I've played with this a few times, and I feel like the best way to do this is to actually have the body control for the character being what's driving the arms on the dragon. because obviously he has weight, and so we want him to feel like he has weight. And so what I'm going to actually do is come here to frame 87, and I'm going to select this first claw control on the dragon, and I'm going to, let's give it a, let's see, I don't want it to parent because I don't want it rotating, so let's just do a translation control on this first upper arm control. And we'll do the same thing with the other one. Here, constraint, oops, add new constraint, translate constraint, and upper arm. So now you can see as I move our guy, the dragon's arms are moving with him. Obviously, they're not quite posed correctly, but the nice thing with this is I can actually animate on top of it, which is fantastic. Because I know in Maya, I would probably create a bunch of locators to try and be able to animate on top of a constraint. So being able to just do that in Unreal is one of my favorite things. So yeah, let's go to frame 87. And let's start actually posing that so that he's grabbing this guy. And we might need to bring the guy back just a little bit, or bring the dragon forward just a little bit. So let's do that. Cool. So now we got that, and I'm going to go back to this, and I'm going to go ahead and delete, because this key is actually going to keep the controls where they were. So I'm going to delete this on both of these controls so that they stay with the guy from the translate. And we can add like extra rotations on it from there, but we don't want them translating at all because we want them sticking with his shoulders. All right, so now we got the dragon, he's coming, he's actually kind of more grabbing our guy, but the other thing that's happening is our guy's not really feeling like he's getting dragged too much. So let's play around with some of this. Let's take our frame 87, we'll keep that one, but let's get rid of the rest. Oh, except I didn't get rid of that. Do the same thing for his feet. There we go. So obviously he starts moving, and our dragon, and now he's kind of like, stalling out. Well, except for that leg, which apparently just doesn't want to have his, it's probably because I'm struggling to select it. There we go. So get rid of that guy too. There we go. So now you can see that's kind of create an issue with our dragon, because now he's really trying to reach back there. But we'll fix that. We'll just bring him, let's actually lean him down a little bit, because in theory he's gonna not be as upright if this dragon is dragging him away. And then what I'm also going to do real quick, because he's in the air, I don't want his IK feet. So I'm actually on, let's see, frame 87 is where he gets picked up, so let's just keep it there. So I'm gonna go find that root controller, and we're gonna actually delete all of these keys because I don't want them. But what I am going to do is come down into, why is my anim details not showing what I want to see? It's not showing the controller. That's gonna be fun. Yeah, hold please. Parent. Yeah. Yeah. They usually show up in the anim details, but I don't know why this isn't showing up today, so. Thank you, Matt. But yeah, so let's turn off these IK feet. So now everything is already kind of baked into FK, and I can start actually playing around with posing that. So obviously, he's getting dragged, so let's create kind of a nice pose where he's got his legs swinging out behind him. And, they're going to need to be coming off the ground at this point, so. So yeah, we can see, his feet's sliding just a little bit there, so I'd probably go through and fix that. But yeah. Got him, he's flying off and about to have a very bad day. So just seeing after a few minutes of working I can do is that's already looking a little bit better. We'll have to make sure we're keeping this moving so that he actually flies off of the frame. So for this last key, we'll just make sure this will be the big movement. And it looks like he's not quite flying off in the same direction our dragon is, so let's fix that. Might have to angle him a little bit. So now, going back to the camera that I forgot to name. Oops. We can see he's flying off, and I need to, fix the dragon animation a little bit too, because when I moved him forward, I did not move all of his keys forward. So we can just open that up, or even just hit here and do selected control rigs only, so that we can see his next keys. And let's look at those curves a little bit. Yeah, and we can see this is probably where that speed up is happening. Apparently my hotkeys have not been transferred over, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and use this. This is our multi-select tool. It's one of my favorites. I think we have a retime and a transform tool, which can sometimes do similar things, but I find I like this one a bit better. Just because I think it's a little bit more intuitive to use for me personally, but it does give you options, definitely. So, yeah. I see, it's actually he's jumping forward. So, let's just get rid of those. Do a new key here where he's being a little more dragged. There we go. So yeah. So once again, after just a few minutes, this is already looking a lot better. I actually have, once again though, because I've gone ahead and gotten another version where I've spent a little bit more time actually working on this, just to give you an idea of what this could actually look like. So. All right. So yeah, obviously, still a few things that need to be fixed with this. I would not consider this done by any means of the imagination, but we can see at least in this one, his legs aren't slipping here. He actually has a proper contact that transitions into that more dragging pose, and he's his feet start actually drag a little bit more than they were in the original. So, but yeah, so now we can go back and just take a look at this from the start, just to see what those updates will look like. And so yeah, you can see this is now actually playing in sequencer. All of those things have been updated, and it looks a lot better than when it did before. From here, we could go on and I could continue refining this animation. We could start adding in lighting and effects and stuff like that. Maybe we'll get another shot in where the dragon's breathing fire at him and he's got to dance around. But yeah, so the idea is that there's a lot of ways that you can work an engine, and I find it, while it's different from your Maya, your Max, it's very easy to use. But let's go back and actually to that slideshow, and we can talk a little bit about how we actually would use this in an actual production of Fortnite. So, just a few things. I guess I didn't really cover this in the demo, but these are some of my favorite settings in Sequencer. Make sure definitely that this little magnet right here is on. Sequencer does let you key things on subframes. So this magnet will keep everything keyed on whole frames so that you're not accidentally keying things when you don't want. And then this guy right here is auto key. So don't accidentally, like me, forget to have that on, and then you're like working on this beautiful pose, and then you go to go work on the next pose, and you realized, oh crap, auto key wasn't on. So now I have to go back and fix that pose. And then so obviously, and then just like with Maya, you can kind of multi-select, marquee select a bunch of keys and hit F to frame your selection. And then the other one, you saw me actually probably turn this on a couple times, but this filter selected controls by control rig controls actually basically makes it so that you only see the control rig you have selected. And this actually is great because if you're kind of more used to that traditional Maya timeline where you just see the keys, you can shrink your sequencer bar to be about the size of your timeline, and all you'll see is the keys on the controls you actually have selected. And then the last one is turn off auto nodes on selection, because basically this is on by default, or turn off auto nodes on selection. This is on by default, and it's probably one of the more annoying things. Because basically anytime I select a control in a control rig, what it's going to do is automatically expand the entire control rig so that I can see all of the controls, unless this is selected. So that's really annoying. I don't like that. If I wanted to expand it, I'll expand it on my own time. So definitely these are some of my favorite settings to have in Sequencer. So using the curve editor, I kind of went through some of these. These are definitely my most used tools. I talked a little bit about the retime and the transform tool, but I generally just like the multi-select tool. I don't know why. I think it's because I can control from where it's scaling. But yeah, that's my personal preference. I definitely would encourage anyone, if you're working in an engine, explore, because there's definitely a lot of ways that you can do things. And then if you're ever looking for your baking or your Euler filter, that's always going to be under the curve editor filters. So that's going to open up a separate window, which you'll see right here. And so there's bake, and then Euler is the second one. So if you're ever looking for those, that's where they're located. All right. So probably one of my new favorite features in 5.4 is being able to, which didn't work because our anim details decided to break during the demo, is that now you can actually select these transforms in the anim details, and it selects basically all of those transforms for every control you have selected. So I had a point in the Lego, one of the Lego trailers, where I had a group of people that were all marching in the same direction, and they were kind of like, the way layout had set it up, they were marching, but did this after a while, and I didn't want that. So it was so mind-bogglingly easy to just go select all of their body controls, and then select their I think it was their translate X, and just squash that down to 0 so that they stopped doing that and they were actually walking in a straight line. And I know, at least when I was working in Maya, that would be the biggest pain in the butt. If I'm ever selecting hands and then trying to just get the rotate Z or something, because I have to select all the controls and then go into the curve editor and find all of the rotate Z. And it was so annoying because inevitably halfway through I would realize I missed one. So this seems stupid, but I swear this is my favorite thing. And then obviously we can also use the Tween, our Tween tools and our animation tools in the curve editor. This basically functions exactly like you would expect if you're familiar with working in Maya or any other traditional external animation software. So you may have noticed during the demo, I was having a little trouble selecting some of the controls. Traditionally, I do work with a picker. We have a lot with our Fortnite teams have made over the years. I guess the Dragon doesn't have one. There's definitely some external marketplace tools I've seen where people have made modular ones that you can pick up. I haven't tested any of them personally yet, but I'd highly recommend you looking into them because this is a game changer of a tool. Being able to just easily select all of the controls and quickly select them makes working super easy. And then I don't know how the wizards did this, but this tool actually works in Maya as well as in Engine for the Fortnite one. We do use different pickers because the controls are different, but being able to use the same tool means that, I'm already used to the kind of like workflow with that tool. And then also it's super easy to modify, like, and very animator friendly in that regards. And how I can add like buttons and add, select a bunch of controls, add a new button to make a kind of a selection set for a project that I'm working on. If, like, in this case, I was working on the shot where Ares is twirling that chain around and throws it at camera, and we don't have a picker for that chain rig. So I was able to just grab the controls that I needed and make a button for all of those individual controls and created my own picker, which was super nice. All right, so talked a little bit about constraints. I didn't mention that there are different types of constraints, just like you'd expect in Maya, 3ds Max. I think even Matt went over them in his talk if you made it back at 11:30. Lookout constraint. So honestly, the biggest one I'm using all the time is parent constraint, because I can't tell you how many times in Fortnite we're animating guys with guns, and just being able to parent that second hand onto the gun so that I'm not having to constantly animate it over is the probably biggest use case of constraints for our entire team. One thing I should mention though is, at least last time I checked, they don't always work well with attach tracks. So attach tracks are a feature in Sequencer where basically I can take a static mesh and attach it to a bone on a character. I can attach it to even just like the character itself. So like if I was working on, something where like I needed a guy to like hold a gun, I can attach the gun to the one hand at least, and the gun will follow it just like it would a parent constraint. Unfortunately, if I then was to try and take that other hand and do an actual constraint onto the gun, because there is no way to do that in attach tracks, that's where I'm gonna start finding issues where the gun, like the hand as I'm scrubbing through is doing like this, because it's like, doesn't know what to do when there's not a constraint already attaching it to the other hand. Yeah, this is the right one. Did go through this a little bit in the demo, but just, space switching is awesome and wonderful, and I think works even better in Unreal than I've ever seen it work in Maya. It's like super fast. It's fantastic. And like I said, new in 5.4, we can create custom spaces. So I can be able to attach, those IK hands to the chest if I wanted to. I can attach them or to the body if I wanted to just very quickly, turn and not have to worry about, moving the IK hands separately from the body. It's absolutely fantastic. And then, yeah, it's very simple to use and actually works pretty quickly. All right, so Matt and Fred would probably be remiss if I did not talk about layered control rigs. This is also a new feature in 5.4, and they're really cool, I'm not gonna lie. We've actually found that our layout artists are using them a lot more than our animators are, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But basically, if you missed Matt's talk earlier, we can now actually add control rigs on top of an animation sequence in Sequencer, so that we can basically add layered motion on top of an existing animation sequence without destroying this animation sequence that already exists. The huge problem with that, with working on cinematics at least, is that a lot of times I do want to change that underlying animation, and having a layered control rig on top of something means that I'm constantly counter-animating something underneath that I can't change. So every time I've seen a layered control rig currently in Sequencer, I've immediately deleted it. And excuse me, sorry, I don't mean to laugh. I've immediately deleted it and then baked everything onto a normal control rig. And then if I wanted to have a layer, I would then go and use control rig sections and add an additive or absolute or override layer, which functions basically exactly like you would expect in Maya, except the one difference I find is that this actually, when you go and add a section, it actually does add the entire control rig, because if you're familiar with in Maya, I can select individual controls and just add them to a layer. Don't think we have that functionality yet, but hopefully one day. But yeah, so this is kind of that's kind of how I would work. with layers. And if I was looking to actually get a layered animation, I would probably go with the sections over the layered control rig, just because I like being able to edit the base layer of the animation. Other thing that's really cool that we have is a pose library. We're actually very slowly kind of working to build one up on the cinematics team across like a bunch of cinematics. We've been, I think, animating in Unreal about a year and a half now. I think all of our trailers have started like working in Unreal. We've done little bits beforehand, but like this is like for the past year and a half, this is the first time at least all of our internal animators at Epic have really just been only animating in the Unreal Engine. So this is still something we're definitely working on, is creating that pose library. But this is a tool that does exist in the base. Like you're able to like go ahead and make it. The one thing I find is a little finicky is whatever level you're working on, that's the default area that the pose library tries to make your library. So it took me a while to figure this out. So just so that you guys don't have to go, why the heck isn't this working? I'm gonna tell you. Right-click and then add a folder to view, and you can then put your control rig, your library wherever you want. Because yeah, that was something I learned the hard way, because oftentimes we're working in a different level depending on what sequence depending on what project we're working in. So having one that's tied to the the Ares world level is not necessarily great. So we definitely want something that's more centralized. So. All right. And then one of the last things I want to go over with is kind of the biggest thing with animation is like making sure everything is actually performing correctly and at 24 frames a second. Sometimes like with the Ares trailer, this actually wasn't a huge issue because our Ares was one of our smaller cinematics. But when we're working on a big like new chapter launch trailer, like those can have like upwards of 60 shots sometimes and like have massive amounts of lighting and effects and things that can cause the engine to actually not play at 24 frames a second. So our wonderful tech artists on the cinematics team have made for us this cool little, there we go, this cool little scalability controller that you can see. And basically, I honestly will just go through and turn everything but shadows off. And that typically fixes it. If not, then the other brilliant thing is because we do work with subscenes, we can actually just turn off the effect subscene. And from there, if you're still having issues, I find that all of our lighting artists work with ray tracing, so just turning on ray tracing debug and going to base color is typically like, if that doesn't fix it, then that's when I start going and crying into Tween and being like, why is it broken still? But worst case scenario, rendering an individual shot usually doesn't take too long, so we can just render your animation out in Unreal and take a look at it in real time. But yeah, I think that's all I had for you guys today. So before we get into anything else, I do want to say I will be in the Dev Lounge at 4 o'clock today with Matt and Jared, but I think we may or may not have time for questions. So we do? Sweet.